first of all, welcome home.
Thank you.
Is it always good to come home?
Yeah, it always is, and I always get to see some family and hang out with some friends. So yeah, I always enjoy it.
This book, this thing, is really remarkable.
Thanks.
When you first wrote this, you didn't think this was going to catch fire, did you?
No, I definitely didn't. I mean, the initial print run that we did was 10,000 copies, which is decent, but definitely not anything like what it's been doing for the past year and a half. So no, I didn't think anybody would want to read this book. I'm 32 years old when the book came out. I'm 33 now, and I just thought to myself, this is sort of going to, disappear without much notice. And I was okay with that. I was proud of the book. I was happy that I had written it, but I certainly didn't expect too many people to actually read it.
Why did you write it?
Well, I really wanted to investigate and think about some of the concepts that I raised in the book, which is this question of why is it that so many kids who are born at the bottom of our socioeconomic ladder end up staying trapped there. And the more that I thought about what I could contribute uniquely to that conversation, the more that I realized that it was the personal side, the fact that this wasn't just some abstract interest, but this is actually the life that I had led, and consequently, I could write it from the inside. And so that's why I ultimately decided to write it as such a personal book.
It is personal. There's a lot of painful, a lot of funny in here.
Sure.
So was it a release, or was it hard to get through when you wrote it?
Well, it's both, right? I mean, I think anything that's hard, or anything that really can be cathartic is necessarily hard. And so there were definitely times when I wrote the book, when I was sitting down to write, where I had to stop, I had to re-brace myself. But I thought, like, at the end of the day, it was a really enjoyable experience. It forced me to think about my life in a way that I had never thought about it. It forced me to think about, my mom and my grandma and my aunt and my sister, and really try to take stock of the influence that all these people had on my life. And at the end of the day, I think I was a much happier person for having written it.
It's maybe equal parts tribute and lessons.
Sure.
And I think there's a lot that all of us can learn from this book. But what is the one thing that you would want all of the people who read it to take away from this?
Well, my main takeaway from the book, and really my main takeaway from my life, is that when a kid grows up in disadvantaged circumstances, they need a lot of things to go right. It's not just better policy, better teachers, better schools. It's really the people that I wrote about. My grandparents, my aunt, my uncle, my sister. I had teachers. I had Marine Corps mentors. I had mentors in law school and college. And I really look back and think to myself, oh my God, without any one of these people, I may not have had any of the opportunities that I've been fortunate enough to have. And I really do think that's the main lesson, is that we've got to figure out how to give more people more opportunities. But part of that process is putting good people in front of them and making sure they have access to some of the same good people I did.
I want to touch on more of that in just a minute.
Sure.
But talk to me, there are a couple of pivot points in this book, and I would hope that you could tell people this. The worst part for you, the worst moment for you, and then the part that really turned for you, when life really turned right side for you.
Yeah, I think that the worst part for me, honestly, was probably towards the end of the book, and there was this moment that I write about that was really hard for me to write about, where my then girlfriend, now wife, and I had this massive blow-up argument. And I had this moment of realization that all of these things that I had grown up around, all of these things that I had seen, I hadn't really escaped from them. They were still with me, and they were still very much a part of me. And that was really hard for me to accept, and really hard for me to get past and to understand. And I think that the turning point would probably be, a chapter later, where I realized that it's not all or nothing. It's not you either are part of this community or you escape it. It's sort of both. You try to find the parts of your community and your family and your neighborhood that really help you and give you some resilience and sense of place. But then you do try to take the parts, like that family trauma, that are not productive, and you try to find a way to get away from them.
When did you know? When did you know that this book was not just something that you got off your chest?
Yeah, I would say probably about a month after the book came out, I gave an interview, and it was my first experience with something going viral. I did this interview, and it actually got around 1 million views in about a week, and it crashed the servers of the website that was hosting the interview. and then the book shot up to the New York Times bestseller list, and I thought to myself, wow, this is much different from what I expected.
It's almost as if you wrote about something that has always been right in front of everyone.
Sure.
We could reach out, we could kind of touch it, we didn't give voice to it.
Yeah.
And it's something, and I don't mean to marginalize what you've done, but something so simple and so real, but none of us gave a voice to it.
Sure. Yeah, I think there's definitely an element to the book's success where either folks who've had no exposure to some of the things that I write about, or people who've lived that experience and feel like somebody's actually put it down on paper and given some representation to that group of people, has definitely been why or at least part of the reason why the book, I think, has struck a chord with a lot of folks. You know, the most gratifying part of writing this book is when somebody comes up to me and says, this is my life, this is the story of my family, this is really, really about me almost. And I think that makes me feel, you know, really, really awesome. But I also think it's part of the story for why it's resonated with a lot of people, is that they see themselves in some of these characters.
You are unfortunately the exception, going to Ohio State and going on to Yale Law School,
Sure.
not the rule.
Sure.
How do you change that?
Well, that's a really big question, and I think that we have to understand that it's probably going to take a generation or multiple generations to change that. You know, if you look at the areas of the country where the American dream is really alive and well, you know, places like Utah, San Francisco, where even children born very poor are doing pretty well, I think that you see some pretty consistent themes. You see strong families, good job opportunities, really strong social networks, you know, not just the family, but the broader community interconnected and playing a positive role in a lot of these kids' lives. And I think that's what we have to do. It's not easy. It's not easy to bring really good jobs to every area across the country. It's not easy to rebuild some of these families and some of these communities, but I think it's the only way to really make a big dent in this problem.
Boy, that is a tough ticket to write.
Yes, it is. Yeah, and that's one of the things that I wish that I had been able to give readers at the end of the book, is this magic wand, this magic solution where if we just did this one thing, then it would make all these problems that much better. But my very real belief is that at the end of the day, it's going to take a long time, and it's going to take a lot of different people, and it's going to really be tough work to rebuild the American dream in some of these places.
This book has been so incredibly well received,
Sure.
lauded. Some folks in Middletown, though, maybe not so happy about this book.
Sure.
How have you felt? How's the reception been for you there?
Well, I felt like it's mostly been positive. You know, most of the people who have read the book, for the reasons that I said earlier, they see some part of their personal story or their family story in it, so it has been, you know, mostly positive. You definitely get a fair share of criticism, and I think that's to be expected. What I always try to tell people is that, you know, the book is not an argument that every single person in Middletown is struggling in the way that I did, in the way that my family did. And it's not an argument that Middletown is a bad place. In fact, I say, you know, a lot of the good things that happened in my life were things that were unique to Middletown, certain teachers, certain opportunities. But at the same time, I try to remind folks that this is there. It's part of not just Middletown, it's part of Southwestern Ohio, it's part of a lot of the things that are going on in the country, and we can't just pretend that it doesn't exist because we'd prefer that it not exist. I definitely wish that there weren't that many kids who were experiencing the level of trauma and instability that I saw growing up, but they're out there, and the only way to really make their problems better is to first recognize them. And that's what I was trying to do with the book, and I hope that people in Middletown and across the country who read it are able to see that you know, these people, I think, deserve it, if nothing else, our respect and our attention.
Your family was all okay with it?
I wouldn't say all okay with it. The funny thing about the book is that when I first started writing it, nobody thought anybody was going to read it. So when I talked to family about some of these stories, they were very open. I wonder if they would have been as open as if they knew how many people were going to be reading the family's dirty laundry. And I wonder that myself. I really do think that if I had gone back in time and told myself, you know, a lot more people are going to read this book than the 10,000 initial print run, the book may have been different.
You
I may
think
have
you
been a
might
little
have
bit
been
more
as
guarded.
honest?
I
'Cause
don't
this was a
think so.
very honest look.
Yeah, that's right. I think that I probably would have been a lot more guarded. I would have been a little bit more strategic about which stories I put in and which stories I left out. But it probably would have been a worse book. And so I'm sort of glad that I didn't know how many people would read it, because I was a lot more honest and a lot more forthright.
The argument against crystal balls.
That's
what
right.
that is.
That's right.
Okay, opioids. I really want to
Sure.
talk to you about this because I think it's important to you. First and foremost, how is your mom? Is she still
Yeah,
heroin dependent?
no, mom's doing great. I mean, those who've been addicted to drugs will always tell you, once an addict, always an addict. It's never something that you completely defeat. But mom's doing really well right now, and I would say that she's doing as well as I've ever seen her. And I think that it is a testament both to the possibilities, but also to her individual resilience, that she's fallen off the horse a few times, but she keeps on trying again. And I honestly couldn't be prouder of her or happier with how she's doing.
That's awesome to hear.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, you have started Our Ohio Renewal.
Sure.
Because I think heroin, opioid abuse is
Sure.
near and dear, unfortunately, to your heart. What
Yep.
are you hoping to do with that? And how do we fix this problem?
Yeah, I think the way we fix the problem is by attacking one individual piece of it at a time. The piece that my nonprofit organization is focusing on are the grandparents and aunts and uncles who are taking care of a lot of the kids who've been orphaned by the epidemic, either because their parents have passed or because their parents are incarcerated or just unable to take care of these kids. One of the things, like I wrote about in the book, that really went right for me is that when mom couldn't take care of me, my grandparents did. And that's happening all across the area right now. And I think that the evidence actually suggests that the kids who grow up with their grandparents, their outcomes are pretty good. And so we've got to figure out how to support more of those kids and make it so they can stay with their families and not necessarily be shuffling around in the system.
That was hard for you, shuffling around. I mean, you didn't necessarily go into the system, but you were between homes sometimes. Sure. That was hard.
Yeah, no, it was very hard. And I think, frankly, I was luckier than most kids because I had my grandparents, because I had my aunt, because I had my sister. And unfortunately, we know that the kids who end up shuffling around in the system much more likely to do drugs themselves, much less likely to work and to start successful families. And I think that's really important, is dealing with the consequences. And to me, the most important consequence is the kids who have been effectively orphaned by this epidemic.
If you could, how close were you to being who you are now and being someone that you are happy you don't know right now, or someone that you would
Sure.
be sorry that occurred?
It's probably impossible to say. I was, I think, pretty close.
One or two things goes one or two different ways.
Oh,
maybe?
absolutely. I mean, there was a period during high school where I was getting failing grades, where I didn't know that I would graduate. I didn't know whether I'd be able to stay in the classes that I was in. And I think that, we know, of course, what happens to kids who drop out of high school when they're in their freshman year, which is, effectively where I was. At the same time, I think that even if I had, even if I had fallen off the proverbial horse, Mammon would have been there to catch me, other people would have been there to catch me. So I like to think that just because of how amazing some of these people were in my life, that even if I didn't make the turn when I made the turn, I would have done it eventually later on.
So this book caught fire in a lot of ways and was sort of, I don't know how to say this, but labeled, and you know what I'm trying to say here, that people said, okay, these are the folks voting for Donald Trump.
Sure.
So it became a political book.
Yep.
In some ways. You didn't intend that at all?
No, I didn't intend it. Wasn't totally surprised by it, just because the book came out at a time when folks were asking questions about a very confusing election. So I wasn't shocked that they attached themselves to my book and tried to understand what was going on among so-called Trump country. But it's always been a little bit weird to me because neither Hillary Clinton nor Donald Trump's name appears in the book. And I think that the problems that I'm writing about in the book, they're not just about one election cycle. These are things that have been with us for a very long time. And I think even if we get it right, they're going to be with us for a long time to come. And so I hope that people don't think of it as a political book, because that's not primarily what it is. I hope that people think it's a book about the American dream and what we can do to address it.
And people who are underreported on, for sure.
No, absolutely, yeah.
So what do you think drew people to draw those conclusions that these are Trump
Sure.
people?
Well, I mean, a part of it is that Donald Trump had just been nominated. He hadn't yet been elected president, but he had been nominated by the Republican Party, and there were a lot of people asking, who are these voters who are not especially ideological conservatives, but are really excited about Donald Trump? Maybe folks who used to vote for the Democratic Party, maybe even folks who voted for Obama, but then are voting for Donald Trump. And because there were a lot of folks asking that question, and there weren't a lot of books out there answering it, I think Hillbilly Elegy became, basically by luck, one of those books that people started to, like I said, attach themselves to in an effort to explain that particular voting pattern.
Do you think that they're still happy that he's their president?
Well, I think it's impossible to generalize. I think that if you ask 10 different people, you're going to get 10 different responses. But yeah, I mean, the general sense that I get is that folks are giving the president a pretty long leash, that, the national media is very fond of asking, when is Trump's base going to abandon him? And I think that if they ever do, it's not going to be 9 months into his presidency. It's going to take a lot longer than that. But the sense I get is that folks are still pretty optimistic. They're still pretty hopeful that he'll deliver. And who knows what will happen 4 years down the road or 8 years down the road.
So you're writing another book?
Yeah, I'll definitely write another book. I'm not actively
You're not
trying to write
writing
one right now.
I thought you were.
Well, I'm sort of kicking around an idea for another book, but no, I don't go home every night like I did when I was writing Hillbilly Elegy and sit at Microsoft Word for 4 hours. I'm not yet at that stage.
Do you want to tell us what it would be? What would it be about?
Well, I'm really interested in exploring something that I wrote about a little bit in Hillbilly Elegy, which is this really positive role that I think religion can play in the lives of a lot of folks. And so, one of the things I note is that the disappearance of some of these religious institutions has been really bad for people because they've lost that sense of community, they've lost that sense of moral support that comes with active church participation. And I'd like to try to understand that a little bit more, understand why folks have abandoned the church, why folks feel abandoned by the church, and try to figure out if there's a way to address that problem.
Because you struggled with your Christianity,
Sure.
your faith,
Sure.
and I think at the end of the book you had sort of said you were coming back around the bend and
That's
maybe
right.
starting to re-explore.
Sure.
Are you still in that position?
Well, yeah. So I would say if I was re-exploring, maybe when the final words of the book were written, I feel very comfortable in my Christian faith right now, and I think it's something that's very important and very positive in my life. But I also think that it's interesting that those who go to church regularly, for example, are less likely to do drugs and more likely to work a regular job. I want to understand why that is, why it's not just a positive influence in my life, but why it seems to exert this really positive social influence. And I think that's what I'll write about next.
That's cool. When do you think we'll see that?
Like I said, I'm not actively working on anything right now, so it'll be at least a couple years before another book comes out.
Movie rights have been bought for this.
That's right.
Ron Howard? Right?
That's right, yeah.
So you think, are you going to
Love
ask
Ron.
that it be shot here?
Yeah, so I've had some conversations about that. I would really like for it to be shot in Middletown in eastern Kentucky. I really, really want that to happen. There are business decisions about tax credits and where it makes the most sense financially to shoot a movie. I'm not really involved in that, but I will keep on pressing Middletown's case.
And Middletown is rising a
It
little
is,
bit. Have
yeah.
you been seeing some of the stuff that's going on with the Opera House?
Yeah. Yeah, so I mean, I was just there. I was in downtown Middletown today, and you ask what's the way out of this, and I think that in Middletown you're starting to see slow signs of business life, of community life returning to the city. And I think that's really important, and that's one of the things that has to happen, is that some of these areas have to come back, and some of these areas have to rise. And it's crazy. 4 years ago, even 2 years ago, you walk downtown Middletown and there wasn't a whole lot going on. It's completely transformed, really, since the book came out.
It's all because of the book.
It's certainly not because of the book. Yeah, yeah. I don't want to even imply that. I don't think it has anything to do with the book at all. I think that a lot of the seeds for downtown Middletown's resurgence were planted well before the book came out. A lot of the businesses, a lot of the folks who've moved home, a lot of the people who are trying to bring Middletown back didn't want to bring it back because of Hillbilly Elegy. They just want to bring it back because it's their community and they care about it, which is fantastic.
Do you, rumor has it that you were strongly courted to run for U.S. Senate.
Yep.
Yes?
I don't know if I was strongly courted, but yeah, definitely a lot of folks talked to me about it, encouraged me to do it.
In fact, I think it was John Kasich's people, Governor Kasich's people, were trying to get you to do that.
There were some people who were affiliated with Governor Kasich, but the thing I've realized about the political process is that a lot of different people from a lot of different places try to encourage you to do it.
So you said no.
I said no. Yes, I did.
Will you ever say yes to something like running for public office?
It's impossible to say. The politician's answer is never say never, and I think that's unfortunately the only answer that I can give, because I didn't want to do it this time, and there were a lot of good reasons to not do it this time. But who knows? I think that the one thing I think public service is worthwhile, and if the time is ever right, then maybe I'll do it. But I also think that there are other useful things you can do, so it may never happen.
But you have moved home.
Sure.
To one of your homes, which is Columbus, Ohio.
Right.
You went to Ohio State.
Sure.
And that is the seat of politics in the state. So what are you doing home? Why are you here? Why are you back? Why are you living in Ohio when you could be living in Silicon Valley?
Do you want me to move back to San Francisco?
I don't want you to move back to San Francisco. I'm just curious as to what's going on in that brain.
Well, when the book really took off, I found myself going back east a lot from California, talking about these problems. And a part of me thought to myself, if you're going to talk about this, why don't you actually go and try to do something about it? And that's really where the genesis of the nonprofit came from. It's also part of what I'm doing with Steve Case and our Rise of the Rest initiative. My very brief pitch there is that we're trying to find ways to get more business investment in areas of the country that aren't coastal, places like Cincinnati, Columbus, Pittsburgh, and so forth. And so why am I here? It's to try to work on those things that I think are important and worthwhile. And why choose Columbus? It's a nice city, and I had fun there when I was at Ohio State, and I don't think, certainly the Columbus decision had absolutely nothing to do with politics. And I think there's a really good chance that 2 years from now we'll end up in Cincinnati just because my wife loves Cincinnati.
I like your wife already.
She likes the hills of Cincinnati. She says Columbus is a little flat for her taste.
Well, and plus it's your old stomping grounds,
That's
not
right.
hers.
That's right.
It's a difference.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's it's fascinating to me that you let me finish this way. This book opened so many doors for you.
Oh yeah, it definitely did.
Talk to me about that and how you're using those doors. And I think you've just done that a little bit.
Sure.
But it's opened amazing doors to you. You've got to bring Amazon to Cincinnati, right? That's like all these things.
We'll see about that.
But it did. It really changed your life dramatically.
Oh no, it radically changed my life. I mean, it gave me opportunities that I certainly would have had otherwise. So this investment initiative I'm working on with Steve Case, the basic idea of it is to get more investment in the middle parts of the country. Well, that entire conversation came because Steve reached out to me on Twitter. We met at a bar in DC, and we realized that we had really similar interests and that we cared about some of the same problems. The nonprofit organization, both from a fundraising perspective and just access to good people to help me operate it, that would have never happened if the book hadn't been published and given me a certain public platform. So yeah, I mean, the book has opened a lot of doors. The question is, how do you actually do something with all those opportunities, and how do you make a difference? And that's what we're figuring out now.
Are you happy?
Yeah. I'm a little tired today just because I got up really early. But no, it's sort of amazing when I think about my mindset when I was 17 years old. I've got, just a beautiful, amazing wife. We have a 3.5-month-old baby, and he's super healthy. I'll show you photos.
Congratulations.
Thank you. and mom is doing well, family's doing great, and I get to work on the things that I actually care about, which, like I said, is some of the stuff that I wrote about in the book. And I just can't, I almost wish I could go back to myself when I was 16 years old and say, it's all going to be okay. And more than that, it's not just going to be okay, but you're going to have really amazing opportunities, and you're going to be really happy when you're 33 years old, because I don't think I expected that when I was 16. But, sometimes you get lucky, and sometimes things work out.
You think you could say that to some 16-year-olds in Middletown right now?
I think I definitely could. As much as I'm worried about the disappearance of the American dream in a lot of parts of the country, I still think at some level everybody has the capacity to build it for themselves. And for a lot of people, it's not going to look like going to a law school or even necessarily going to a four-year college. But when I was 16 years old, what I really wanted was to have a job that was meaningful and allowed me to pay the bills and a family that was happy. And I think we can give that to a lot more people than we're giving it to now. And I think that that's attainable for a lot more 16-year-olds. So yeah, I think I could definitely look a 16-year-old in the eye in Middletown and say, if you work hard, if you rely on people who are good to you, and you get a little bit of luck, then the dream is definitely possible.